I'm Shahar Azani, and today I am pleased as always and as ever to join David Harris on defending Israel. As Israel keeps on fighting Hamas in the south and Hezbollah in the north, Judea and Samaria keep on simmering, and the threats keep on piling on the radar of the Israeli security establishment in this multi-front war against Israel. Yet the battle doesn't end there, but rather rages on in the international front of public opinion and foreign governments. Canada announced an arms embargo against Israel, while the US has announced and now threatening VP Kamala Harris that an Israeli action in Rafah might have consequences. Does the world not understand the nature of the threat Israel is dealing with? Have they forgotten the atrocities of October 7th? David, as you hear all of the above, and you must have seen the cover of The Economist, Israel is alone, what are your thoughts in general before we dive into the details?
I think you've captured them in these opening words, Shahar. In a way, this is all quite predictable. I don't want to be a smart aleck and say we saw each and every one of these actions. But we knew this was going to be a race against time. We knew that after October 7th, according to the script, and we had seen this before, in the first days there would be expressions of solidarity, of sympathy, of alliance, and that over time it would begin to erode. And as others have said, Israel is the only country that we know that is not allowed to finish a war. So it's taken, 5-6 months, but here we are. The war is not over. You cannot put out a fire 80% and walk away. You put it out 100% or it comes back to destroy.
Very good capture.
Here we are. And you also may remember from our early conversations right after October 7th, I said on this show, there are three fronts to this war. The Israeli military front after October 7th, the Israeli home front, and the global front beginning in the United States.
Right.
We needed, above all, to ensure that Israel got the time and the space and the support from the United States government that it needed to achieve its three goals. The goals: eradicate Hamas, ensure that Gaza could never again be used as a launching pad, and free the hostages. And those goals have not yet been fully achieved.
Right.
But as you described it with the US and Canada and others, here we are.
You know, you're talking about these goals, and the US is important as a strategic ally for Israel. And of course, the natural question would be the US's position vis-a-vis the Security Council this week, not vetoing the resolution that does not tie between the demand for an immediate ceasefire, and the return of the innocent Israeli hostages. And we heard that Ismail Haniyeh, one of Hamas's leaders, not only welcomed the Security Council resolution and the US's position, but also stated, like you said, that the Zionist entity has achieved none of its goals. How do you see the US's position and the UN in general, the Security Council, vis-a-vis all of the situation that we're facing now in the Middle East and the attacks on Israel? Give us your perspective as it stands following the US's actions.
Let me preface it by saying, as I've always tried to say, in a very hyper-partisan world, I remain a nonpartisan.
Right.
So if I criticize, it's not an attempt to advance another side for the election, but here we are. I see myself as an advocate for Israel and the Jewish people. What helps, I endorse.
Right.
What hurts, I oppose. The United States' decision to abstain in the UN Security Council was shameful. There's no other way to put it. It was shameful because the United States caved. And the United States is not Luxembourg, with all due respect to Luxembourg. The United States has often stood alone in the Security Council. It stood on principle. And even when it was 14-1, the United States did not reconsider using its veto. When the United States chose to abstain on a resolution that called for a ceasefire without a demand, not a request, not a reference,
Right.
but a
Conditional.
a condition for the immediate release of all the hostages. Then the United States abdicated leadership. And the question is why? And then when you look at the resolution, and there's reference to Ramadan.
Right.
I mean, with great respect, but October 7th was a very special Jewish holiday. It was both Shabbat and Simchat Torah. Did anyone in Hamas say, oh my goodness, out of respect for Jewish religious tradition, we're not going to attack? Right. And how many times within the Muslim world, the Iran-Iraq war, for example, was fighting raging during Ramadan? But you see what's happening here, and I hate to say it, Shahar, because I don't want to use the term too loosely. There's a sense of appeasement. We're going to try, at this point, to feed Israel to the other side as a kind of sacrificial lamb. In a way, and yes, I'm grateful for what the Biden administration has done since October 7th in many respects. But, you know, I'm a captive of history. Czechoslovakia was fed to the Germans in an effort to satisfy them. Lo and behold, it didn't satisfy them.
Right.
And as Churchill famously said, you know, an appeaser feeds the crocodile hoping he'll be last.
Exactly.
So,
and imagining that he'll be never, right?
Or never, at the very least last.
Yep, you're right.
So it was a sad day, which was reminiscent of December 2016, when the Obama administration, and there's a lot of overlap between the Biden and Obama teams,
right,
when the Obama administration abstained on another Security Council resolution.
Right.
And that still is not forgotten.
Right, that's definitely the case. You know, it reminds me of the attack that occurred in Moscow. You know, on the same day when Russia was playing those same tricks with China at the Security Council vis-a-vis Israel in the Middle East, the same kind of Islamic terror strikes at the very heart of Moscow, killing 133 people and injuring dozens others. It sends the same message, right? This is the kind of tiger you can't ride. There is no appeasement, there is no game with such deterministic evil. It has its own goals regardless of where you stand. So how do you explain the US's position? I mean, especially in an era where everybody around in the Middle Eastern neighborhood is looking and observing to see whether the US, forget about Israel for a minute, whether the US is a reliable superpower that will stand by its allies in the Middle East. We know that everybody is looking at this conflict. It's far beyond just Israel and Hamas.
I think, unfortunately, Shahar, I hope I'm wrong. You said Hamas is celebrating.
Yep, they do.
And from their point of view, rightly so.
Correct.
And Israel, which should be our bulwark in this battle against jihadist extremism, which begins in the Middle East but doesn't end in the Middle East. We blinked.
Right.
Again, I keep using the same terms. We blinked, we caved, we appeased. Why? Because, again, I think the United States found itself under unrelenting pressures, plural, including domestic pressures. And one question which was asked from the beginning, we discussed it on earlier shows, was when would the left wing of the Democratic Party be able to reach Joe Biden? Joe Biden followed his instincts in the beginning, and they were good instincts.
Good instinct, you're right.
Very good instincts. And we praised those instincts. But the pressure from the Democratic left was strong. And all of a sudden, there's this belief. I'm not sure where it comes from. I'm not sure it's an examined belief that somehow the entire election in November 2024 will come down to the state of Michigan, and that within this vast state with millions of voters, that the election will be determined by a relatively small number of voters who live in or around Dearborn, Michigan, and who are in opposition to the Biden policy. Now, I very reluctantly give a lot of credit to the people on the other side who managed to make this case seemingly convincingly although I don't know why. As others have said, there are a lot more swing voters in Michigan than Dearborn.
Right.
There are auto workers. There are suburban women. There's the Jewish community.
Right.
There are many in what will be a hotly contested election. So are we really to believe that because of domestic politics, the very existence of Israel could be jeopardized by more recent American actions? And look, I don't know what happened between Washington and Ottawa, for example. I'm not privy. But would Justin Trudeau and his government have allowed a ban on weapons transfers to Israel to have happened if the U.S. really opposed it?
Right.
Hard for me to believe. There's a good relationship. This is not an adversarial relationship between Washington and Ottawa.
Right.
And would Chuck Schumer, Senator Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, would he have taken the position he did if there weren't some kind of wink and nod, some kind of careful choreography, even if it's not to be found on paper, between the White House and the Senate leader? Things are going on here. And it's an attempt to give this administration in Washington cover by being able to say, well, look how other countries are reacting. Look at how even leaders of the Jewish community like Chuck Schumer are behaving. But I think one cannot absolve the administration of its own responsibility here for this turn of events.
One of the things that troubled me, and I really want to take the lead from what you just said, you mentioned that the Dearborn gangs were able to prove their case strongly to the White House in the demand to take a more immoral position vis-a-vis Israel. With all due respect, David, where is the Jewish leadership? Where are Jewish organizations? I mean, we're supposed to be so well organized. Can we not? Are we not making the same case? I'm speaking, and I'm sure you are, with so many Jewish voters out there who are to describe their feeling after the United States abstention is disappointment is the very least on that scale. So that message can't be conveyed? Do they think that the Jewish community will consider no other options, that Israel is not on the radar, and make them that mistake in such a crucial election? Are we not able to make that case, David?
You know, I'm no longer
right.
a 24/7 part of that organizational world, although I spent nearly 50 years in
right.
it. But again, I forgive me for referencing earlier conversations, Shahar, but we again discussed this point.
Yeah.
Can Jewish advocacy organizations make the transition from an October 6th model to an October 7th model? They're not the same. And we need organizations that wake up and understand that everything has changed. Number one. Number two, if I can be really honest and forthcoming.
Right. I think our viewers would appreciate that.
Well, the stakes are too high not to be at this point.
Right.
I still think that there are many Jewish organizations in the advocacy space that instinctively are center left. And they're going to find it very difficult to take on the Democratic Party when it's in power. And I say this as a nonpartisan.
Right.
In my years, I took on the Republican Party, I took on the Democratic Party when we disagreed.
Right.
But my starting point was not ideological. My starting point was, what do we believe is in the best interest of Israel and the Jewish people?
Right.
When Donald Trump announced the move of the embassy to Jerusalem, we applauded. It didn't matter what else we thought about the Trump agenda.
Right.
And when Donald Trump reacted to Charlottesville with his famous comment, or infamous comment, about good people on both sides, we were very clear in our criticism. But some of the organizations that we know, instinctively, whatever they call themselves, do not want to take on an administration led by Joe Biden. And
October 7th dictates a different reality, like you said. And you mentioned, even vis-a-vis your statements, that this is the time for honesty, right? That you're sharing the way it is. This is a significant and very alarming wake-up call to our organizational leadership. If not now, then when? And if not them, then who?
I've believed for decades.
Right.
And again, I keep referring backwards, and I'm sorry, but Jews make a fundamental political mistake in this country. It long precedes October 7th. If we care about Jewish issues, although I think they're much more universal.
Very true.
Antisemitism, Israel, these are not simply Jewish proprietary issues.
Exactly.
Make both political parties fight for our vote and our support. Do not let one political party take our vote for granted, that come what may, we will be there for them as reliable voters, and do not let the other political party think that no matter what they try to do, we're not going to listen, because we're not going to change our voting pattern. We have to be a lot smarter. And if the wake-up call did not come after October 7th and did not come in now, when all of a sudden Dearborn, Michigan becomes the centerpiece of conversation, then we're in trouble. We're in trouble. I don't think we're going down to defeat, Shahar. I think we're going to recover, but it's taking too much time.
Yeah.
It's taking too much time. And, it's not just that Jews are in blue states, So who cares? New York is still going to vote Democratic. California is still going to vote Democratic. But Jews happen to be in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Florida and Georgia and other swing states. And we have to make clear, you want our vote, you want our support, we're open, we're listening. Right. But don't take it for granted, or conversely, don't write it off.
Yeah, and the people on the ground are upset. The Jewish, forget about, I'm not even talking about heads of organizations. The community is upset and riled up because we are witnessing an existential threat in Israel. We're seeing the rise of anti-Semitism as a result, but parallel to, that really strikes at the core of the very legitimacy of the Jewish state's existence, and we're suffering the consequences right here. And here is one major point that you're making, and I want you to reiterate that. We're talking about Israel and the Jewish community, but these are fundamentally core U.S. issues, U.S. strategic issues, U.S. foreign policy, the U.S. society. I mean, all of these issues touch the core of the American national security interest. It's not just about Israel. There is a reason, our enemies have a reason to frame it as a Jewish issue or Israeli issue, but the truth is that it's a U.S. interest, is it not?
Totally. By the way, just one brief anecdote, and then your question. I went to the gym this morning, and on the way out in the lobby, a lady approached me, and she said to me, "You don't know who I am, but I know who you are. I watch you on JBS," she said. And she said, "Yesterday, after I learned about the U.S. vote, I changed my party affiliation. I've been a lifelong Democrat.
Wow. I
am now, as of today, an independent." So one person, I don't want to extrapolate, Shahar, and say that thousands have done it.
No,
but for people who care, you can't blithely ignore all of this as if it doesn't matter, it's inconsequential. I still hate the other political party. Wake up, be smart.
Right.
Be smart. Make both parties come to us. By the way, as they once did. I completely agree with you. This is a much bigger issue that the United States is playing with. If Israel can be treated as it was at the UN, then does Saudi Arabia really have an incentive to take risks for peace with Israel? What do Beijing leaders take from what they see about how strong is the American commitment to our allies? Read Taiwan, read the Philippines, read Southeast Asia. What message does Vladimir Putin take from this? When we claim that we will be with Ukraine till the end, President Zelensky, we stand with you, all of these proclamations. Really? Is that what Vladimir Putin believes? He can read from not just this, but this too.
Yeah.
North Korea, Pyongyang, what do they take from this? This is a much larger set of issues. And we all say it, Shahar, we say it, but we don't always act as if we internalize it. And I come back to the central lessons of the 1930s, which I think was arguably the most decisive decade in modern history. Lesson number one, a failure of imagination. Hitler said in Mein Kampf, 10 years earlier, what he wanted to do to the Jews and to the world. He didn't hide it, he said it. He came into office in January 1933, and there was a total abysmal failure of imagination to believe that what he actually said and wrote, he would do.
He would do. By the way, Mein Kampf, the same book that's being taught in Gaza's classrooms in
Also.
Arabic, highlighted. Important to remember.
Also, and lone voices like Winston Churchill, if you look at him in the 1930s, he was being mocked. He was being vilified for his confrontational approach.
Right.
By the way, more modern example, 2012, the debate between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, when the question about what is the greatest geopolitical threat came up, what did Mitt Romney say? Russia. How did Barack Obama react? I can't quote him, but he mocked him. He ridiculed him for saying that Russia was the greatest threat. I think his words were, Mitt, the 1980s are calling you.
Right.
Something like that.
Right.
Guess what? Mitt Romney was correct.
Yes,
he was correct.
Yeah.
And this was before the 2014 invasion of Donbass and Crimea, and before the 2022 invasion of Ukraine as a whole. So how the world looks at us matters. Number one, failure of imagination. And number two, as we discussed, appeasement does not work.
Right.
The Western powers tried it in 1938-39 with Czechoslovakia. And Hitler looked at them very gravely and said, that's all I need.
Yeah.
That's all I want. And Chamberlain and his ilk believed, gentlemen do not lie to gentlemen. That's not the way we were taught at Oxford and Cambridge, or here at Harvard and Yale.
Right, so if you only...
Those two lessons, joined by American isolationism in the 1930s, are, to me, the enduring lessons of geopolitics, and they're applicable today.
Yeah.
No failure of imagination, no appeasement, and no American isolationism will work.
Right.
To the contrary.
Or the world will go up in flames, as we've seen in the past.
And as it's beginning to again.
Yeah.
War in Ukraine continues to rage.
Right, right.
Iran has openly sided with Russia against Ukraine.
Right.
China is building a massive defense arsenal before our eyes. North Korea continues to test all kinds of advanced ballistic missiles.
Right.
It's happening.
It's happening. And instead of the West's endurance, we're seeing the West's failure in standing up to these, taking the moral stand and sticking to it rather than falling apart in the face of the extremist forces from within. We only have a couple of minutes left, David. As always, I don't know what's
Change
happening with
the
time.
clock.
What can we do?
Please get a slower clock.
I'm telling you, on so many levels. But I want to ask you, one of the things I love the most when I talk to you is looking at the world and actually upholding our heroes and looking at the villains. Do you have a hero this week? Anybody you want to tell us that you appreciate their position, or that we should, remember their graces? Or are we, as The Economist claims, Israel is all alone?
Israel is not all alone. I think the first hero are the vast majority of Americans who continue to tell the pollsters that they support Israel.
Very true.
We don't hear enough about them because they're often nameless. But roughly 2/3 of America gets it. It gets it. It understands, even 6 months into the war, it gets it. The second heroes are clearly the IDF. I continue, Shahar, to have enormous admiration for the bravery, the courage, the determination of these young men and women. By the way, Jews, sometimes Muslims, sometimes Christians, sometimes lone soldiers who've traveled from abroad to help. I have great admiration for the volunteers. My daughter-in-law's mother just went to Israel to volunteer. She's a grandmother. She volunteered. She lived in a tent on a military base, packing medical supplies. The nameless. The named, Douglas Murray. Congressman Richie Torres, Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, the people who continue to speak out with complete moral clarity.
Right.
On the other hand, the other side of the ledger, you're going to ask? I think what happened in Canada, and I have to call out the New Democratic Party, but in the end, the Parliament and Justin Trudeau went along with this call for a ceasefire without any linkage to the hostages, any conditional linkage. This ban on weapon sales, even if it's symbolic, to me was a scandal. I've long been a fan of Canada. I think it's one of the great countries. How about Spain? How about the Prime Minister of Spain convening who? Ireland, Slovenia, and Malta, and asking for a unilateral declaration of Palestinian statehood. In the middle of an existential war launched by Hamas, which rules Gaza, where the Palestinian Authority in West Bank is trying to jump on the Hamas train. Now we're going to have a unilateral declaration of statehood.
Right.
So I said on Twitter, X as they now call it, maybe the world should begin to look at places like Catalonia.
Exactly.
And elsewhere.
Yep.
And two can play the same game. So they, I think, Spain in particular, but Malta, Ireland, Slovenia, and in an earlier incarnation, Spain and Belgium, have really, really shown their true colors. Colombia, Chile, Bolivia, Brazil continue to be among the loudest voices critical of Israel. South Africa is still looking for ways to try and isolate Israel.
Yeah.
And we need to keep calling them out, because the fact of the matter is we have the best asset. It's called truth. Sometimes it's underrated, Shahar, but it's truth. Truth. The facts are on our side. The truth is on our side. And one day we will prevail. So someone wrote to me, and I'll end with this. Someone wrote to me today from the Midwest, someone I know, and said, you know, it's just too much. Everything I'm seeing, the abstention, Canada, the media. What do we do, David? And my response to her was, we do what we always have done throughout history. We persevere. We persevere. That's what we do.
Very true. We take a deep breath and we know that victory is at hand no matter which. And we just read during Purim what Mordecai told Esther, right? That if you don't act, the Jewish people will still be saved, but you and the house of your father will perish.
Exactly.
But it is maybe that for this time you have risen to your position as queen.
Right.
And
so
I think
to which I say, ani ma'amin.
Right.
I believe. I believe. I persevere, because I believe truth is on our side.
Agreed. David, as always, thank you so much for the wise analysis, the words of encouragement, especially at this time. It's about patience and perseverance, because like you say, we will triumph. A clear mind and a watchful eye are in great need as we navigate the stormy and perilous waters of international diplomacy and warfare for Israel, but truly for the US and the free world. These are indeed trying times for us all, and the only way we get through them, as we always do, is together. May we see better times soon, as we always end, Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, Shahar.